This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Diogo Jota back and scoring, Liverpool getting a result without necessarily being brilliant. And what did we make of Thiago? Welcome to the latest Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo. I'm Matt Addison and we'll get into all of those topics very shortly with Ian Doyle and Sean Bradbury alongside me. We'll also have a chat about Ozan Kabak, Nat Phillips, the international break and a few more bits and bobs too over the course of the next half an hour or so. But there is of course only one place to begin, and that is Doyle at Molineux, where you were last night. Liverpool winners by 1-0. What did you make of the game? Did Liverpool deserve that 3 points, or was it a little bit closer than that, do you think?
Well, in terms of winning, they couldn't get any closer than 1-0, could they? Let's be honest. But the game itself was absolutely appalling for the most part. The first half in particular was absolutely dreadful. In fact, Neil Jones, who used to work with, he was sat nearest to me, and I just turned to him and went, "This is the worst game I've seen all season." And he replied, "Well, there's been an awful lot of competition." I was like, "I know, that's how bad this actually is." But there was one bit of quality, wasn't there, in the first half? That passing movement between Mane and Salah, and the finish from Jota. So in that sense, I suppose Liverpool were the ones who had that, as I say, that one moment of quality which made all the difference in the game. And when you're playing in a game that was such a massive slog as that is, and if you look at it, Wolves' games all season have been like that. Nearly all of them have been like that. Certainly the ones that they play at Molineux. And it was quite interesting walking into the ground. We were speaking to some of the Wolves, staff members, the people who are working at the door, and they were like, "Oh, it's absolutely rubbish, this, isn't it?" I says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Just the football's just rubbish, isn't it, without the fans there?" And it was quite interesting. I know we've spoken about this a million times, but it's quite interesting hearing somebody else that's got nothing to do with us just talking about it. They're not even journalists; they're just people who work for the club, just saying, "Can't wait for fans to get back in." I'm not really that fussed about the results. So, in that sense, that was quite heartening. But the game itself just underlined what they were talking about. It was just bad. It was a bad game. But having said all of that, that is exactly the kind of game that last season Liverpool would have won. And this season, for the most part, they've not been winning. Look how many times they've lost 1-0 recently. You look at Burnley, Brighton. We've said it before, haven't we? Chelsea, Fulham, even the Everton game, until they get the penalty at the end. It's a 1-0 game. So Liverpool haven't been putting away these games where they've not played particularly well. And part of the reason for that is Jota. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that earlier in the season he was doing exactly the same thing. Look at the amount of times he'd scored the first goal or a late goal for a winner, whether it's coming off the bench or even against Arsenal, where he scored, the late goal that kind of sealed that particular game. That was way back in, what was it, September, where they won 3-1? Maybe even in August, I can't even remember it that long ago. It must have been September. So, yeah. So, overall, Liverpool, I thought defensively they were actually pretty good. I thought Trent Alexander-Arnold had his best game defensively for a very long time. Nat Phillips did what Nat Phillips does, and Kabak, after a bit of a wobbly opening, shall we say. I mean, there was one bit of positioning very early on where he just was nowhere. He was just facing completely the wrong way. But it was a bit after that he did have the challenge, didn't he, with Traore in the area where he dispossessed him. And I think he grew in confidence from that. So it was an easy night for Liverpool. Obviously, there was the added complication for Wolves for Rui Patricio, his injury, which affected, both teams, wasn't it? Because the game was stopped for 10 minutes. And thankfully, from what we're led to believe, certainly straight after the game, he's going to be okay. But that affected both teams. That kind of summed up the game itself. But Liverpool got it done. Could have done without a little bit of the, right at the end, Fabinho trying to chip the ball up and inside his own area and pass it to Keita, then do chest it down. It's like, hang on, lads, come on, just get rid of the ball. There's a time and a place for this. It's not here. But they got the job done. It's another clean sheet. I know we're going to talk about the centre-backs in a bit. What a surprise, what a difference it makes when you've actually got people playing in the actual positions, even if they may not be as good as a general football. As no one's going to say Kabak and Phillips are better footballers than Fabinho or Henderson, but the better centre-backs. And that's kind of thing possibly is one thing that maybe Jurgen Klopp and his coaching staff have learned, over the course of this season. Yeah, Henderson and Fabinho can do a job there, but it's far better having people there who've played there before for a long time and know exactly what to do.
These games do tend to be quite close, don't they, Sean, between Wolves and Liverpool. Liverpool do tend to come out on top, but quite often, particularly at Molineux, it's only by the odd goal. Was this just one of those games that it didn't really matter how well Liverpool played? They just needed to win, get the 3 points, not least, of course, because of the results maybe going their way this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Capitalising on slips from the teams around them, Chelsea, Everton, Spurs. was a big thing. I think just the fact that the international break is now upon them, and almost in a squad sense, in a staff sense, and certainly in a fan sense, then they had to get another win on the board and a win in the league to follow up the Champions League performance, but to take them into this break now, which is absolutely crucial, really, isn't it? Obviously, we might well come on to talk about international breaks and where the players are off to. It's crucial that players don't get injured or don't enter new bubbles and dangerous territory and come back with COVID and that type of thing. But I just think having a mindset going into it on the back of a couple of wins, which stringing two together hasn't happened for a while, is a really big thing. And obviously Klopp and his lieutenants at Kirby have got a bit of time now to kind of just plot the course really for the rest of the season. I think coming out of this international break, 5 games that follow that, I mean, it's quite an obvious point in a way, isn't it, that will utterly define the season. You've got a big away game against Arsenal in the league, which, thank God for away games at the moment, is another one where Liverpool have actually managed to get a win and have looked so much better in them. I think that's going to be a huge test of Liverpool's kind of priorities and ambitions really for the rest of the season. But then you've got the Champions League game, then you've got Villa, then you've got the other Champions League game, then you've got Leeds. So I think having a positive result to draw on going into these 3 weeks, which is a really long break as well, isn't it? It feels a lot longer than you normally get at this time of year. Is massive really. But yeah, the game in general, I think Doyle's right. Certainly in that first 50 minutes, Liverpool were really shoddy and took a bit of time to find their composure and find their rhythm. But ultimately, there's a lot they can come away with and be very happy about. Probably not in midfield, but virtually everywhere else. I think to a man, the defence were good. I know we'll come on talk about the centre backs in detail, but I think the full backs as well were both superb. 2 of their best games for a while. Despite the fact that because Robertson's been run into the ground and the international break is a bit of a worry because he'll go and have 3 big games with Scotland, but he did very well. But yeah, a first half goal and another rarity and a very, very good one from open play. And I think just in general, a tactical plan that worked. And I think Liverpool have got a little bit of a blueprint now, certainly with some of the teams and some of the situations that they'll be facing teams in the Premier League, in terms of like teams having to chase points, or maybe a few who might not be as intense as they would have been earlier in the season because their seasons are kind of decided. I think that's going to be useful. And the Champions League as well. Obviously we saw them beat Leipzig, and now we've seen them win in the Premier League with quite a similar system. But I think the way that they set up yesterday could suit them in Europe, and it might suit them in the league as well. So yeah, I totally agree with Doyle. Not a classic, not a vintage one that I'll ever be watching again on DVD, I don't think. But one that could be fairly significant in terms of setting the tone for the rest of the season.
Yeah, definitely. I think we might as well talk about the international break. You've both sort of referenced it there. I think it's FA Cup weekend next week. That's why it's a slightly longer break, 19 days, I think it is, between Liverpool matches, Doyle. But there will be some players who are going away on international duty and others that won't. Can you give us an idea of who might be going, who might have been prevented by going by Liverpool, perhaps?
Well, we know that the Brazilians, that's Firmino, Fabinho, Alisson, they won't be going because all of the South American qualifiers have been called off. As for the rest, I think more or less anyone that's fit is going, with the exception of Naby Keita. He will be recalled after Guinea's first African Cup of Nations qualifier, I think, at home against Mali, because the second game's in Namibia, and that's on the UK's red list, which means that if he'd have played in that, which I think is a week on Saturday, he'd then have to come back and quarantine for 10 days, which would mean he would then not be playing, certainly not against Arsenal, certainly not the first game against wherever they play in the Champions League first leg in the quarterfinals, and then possibly the Villa game after that. So it is a question of Liverpool just exercising that particular right, which I would imagine most of the Premier League team, in fact, most of the teams across Europe are going to do. There may have been a slight concern over Jota because he's obviously going to go and play for Portugal against Azerbaijan in their first World Cup qualifier. But 2 things have happened since, initially that story broke in terms of it may be under threat. The first thing is that the game's been moved to Italy anyway. And the second thing is on Friday, I think Portugal go off the red list, so it could have been played in Portugal anyway. So I think Liverpool, other than those 3.5, shall we say, I think the rest of them will be going off that are fit. Matt Addison won't be going, will he? Because he's going to be out for England, and Liverpool will hope he's back at some point next month, I think. So yeah, the rest. I mean, it's another case of Klopp crossing his fingers and everything else, and hoping that the players come back fit. But he'll have a lot of players because Nat Phillips won't be going. Milner won't. So the three Brazilians. There'll be quite a few more who won't be going. So we'll have a lot of time, certainly this week, to prepare his players for what's to come. And as Sean said, I think it's going to be an interesting time because they didn't have a pre-season as such, did they? And I can't remember when it was earlier this season. Said we're going to have a mini one. Though I think there was a break of I must admit I can't remember what week it was where they didn't play, or they just didn't. Basically, they just didn't have a game in the week, did they? I think they played Saturday, Monday, or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but this is a genuine one for them, and. Yeah, it is. They're going to be, just as I say, it's down to fortune, and we know what Liverpool are like with these international breaks. Most of the time, someone will get injured, but they do have a lot of players now. Apart from centre back, they have a lot of players available, which is unusual for this season. And what a surprise! They've suddenly started getting some good results. So who knew that players not being injured would help them in their quest to win some games?
Injuries aside, Sean, has this break come at a good or bad time, do you think, for Liverpool? They've come off the back of certainly one good performance and certainly two good results. Is this a time that you probably just want to play again, or do you think they will benefit for the remainder of this season by having certainly the first week of these 3 weeks off to be on the training pitches in Kirkby?
I think, obviously, the fact that 2 wins have come in quick succession and there's a bit of positivity there, and we saw an unchanged team for the first time in a long time. I think my natural inclination last night would have been to say you just want another game as soon as possible, and to try and keep that momentum going. But really, I think when you think about the rest of Liverpool's season, obviously in terms of finishing in the top 4, it's not in their own hands. They need teams to slip up. In terms of the Champions League, they're in the last 8, and we await the draw on Friday with huge anticipation to see who they get there, and they're a live proposition, and that obviously aren't they, to go this deep in the competition despite not being great this season, it's to their credit, and I think they can beat anyone, especially if teams come and have a go at them. But I think really now it's about, because there is absolutely no margin for error, I think it's crucial really that Klopp and his staff, and like Doyle said, the players who are still around, get a bit of time to really plot and plan team selections, kind of maybe rotation as much as they possibly can. Because, the fact that there are players there and there are options now, I think finally all the issues that Liverpool have wrestled with for months, and really one of the main reasons why the season hit the skids is we were often calling for Klopp to try something a little bit different and break out of the muscle memory of 4-3-3. And, obviously there was square pegs and round holes. There was players who didn't really know that system very well, new partnerships springing up all over the place. And temptation was to go, well, why don't you try 4-2-3-1? Why don't you mix it up? And realistically, I think a lot of the time you just didn't have the options. The plan B players weren't there; they were out, they were injured, or they were just coming back from injury. But with what he's got now, I think that there's a real bit of opportunity to rotate, mix things up, and obviously they have to try and compete on 2 fronts now, don't they? I think finishing top 4 in whatever is the most realistic way possible is obviously the main aim for the season. So things like that Arsenal game, I imagine he'll already be thinking about, Robertson's played every Premier League game. Is there a way of getting Tsimikas or Milner in there at left back? Wijnaldum's another one, I think, who's played, if not quite every game, it's not quite started every game. He's featured in most, hasn't he? I think he's only behind Robertson for minutes played in the Premier League. So there's another one where you'd be planning midfield selections and thinking about, Jones, Keita and others who can come in for Wijnaldum and give him a breather at some point. So, yeah, I think, instinctively you want the momentum to carry on, and maybe in the players' heads there will be a little bit of that. I mean, they'll be happy, some of them, I imagine, to go off and have a bit of a break and get away from the Liverpool grind, almost in the way it's become this season, and see their international teammates and compete in that sphere. But, yeah, I think overall it's better that Liverpool have a bit of time and really kind of get their heads together about how to finish this season as strongly as possible, domestically and in Europe.
In terms of the top 4 race, Doyle, do you think it's still on the table for Liverpool to make that top 4? I think it's 5 points to Chelsea in 4th, 9 games for both teams to play. Is it still realistic? I mean, a week or so ago, we'd kind of written it off, but results then go your way this weekend, and maybe it just sort of creeps back into the possibility again.
Well, it's a possibility. I mean, I wrote something that it's basically become from impossible to improbable, which for Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp is like, well, we've got a chance here then. They are relying on other teams. I mean, if we're being absolutely brutally honest here, we don't think West Ham are going to finish in the top four. I was amazed that Tottenham have just fallen off again, because I actually thought they were coming into form, and I actually had backed them to get into the top four and Leicester to drop out. But Leicester seems to have found a second wind, so it looks like it's basically everybody into that fourth place, isn't it? Because United look as though they're going to finish in the top three. So they've got a chance, but I think they can't afford to lose a game now. There's 9 games left. They got to, as you say, you got some tough ones. Look, United away, Leeds away, Arsenal away, but they're doing better away from home. It's those 4 home games, and in fact, you could say the 3 home games, because by the time they play Crystal Palace, there'll be 10,000, hopefully, in the stadium, and you'd like to think the players would respond to that. So there's going to be more twists and turns. Well, I'll say this, right? If Liverpool win 7 and draw 2 of the last 9 games, they'll definitely enter the top 4, no matter what anyone else does. So that gives them a little bit of leeway, because I think Chelsea have got City, Leicester. They've got a few other difficult games, and they're all in a row towards the end. So, and also Chelsea have had some good results under Tuchel, but they haven't played particularly well. I think they've only scored something like 13 goals in 12 games or something like that. So they've clearly gone the way Liverpool are going now, but let's get the defence sorted first. Let's just be really solid. Let's just get these 1-0, 2-0. Let's just get the wins that we need. So I think it might be between those two. And we've looked at Everton, but I think they've got a bad injury there with Decore missing. And we saw that against Burnley. I think they might struggle to hold on. I think they'll put everything into that FA Cup game they got against Man City at the weekend, which, let's be honest, it's about the toughest game they could have actually asked for. So, yeah, I think, if you're asking me whether they will finish in the top 4, I'll still say no. But if you ask me whether they can, I'd say yeah. And I said about a month ago on here, I said if Liverpool finish in the top 4, it'll be as much as an achievement as reaching the Champions League final in 2018, and I still go along with that.
Yeah, it would certainly require, Sean, a run of good results. Maybe, 7-8 wins might be necessary. If you got any confidence that, obviously, with 1 or 2 of these players back, they can do that? And does it essentially rely on Liverpool keeping at least the players that they've got now fit, if not adding 1 or 2 more to come back off the injury table?
Yeah, I think the injury thing will absolutely define it and decide it. And yeah, it's all about the state that the squad is in after this international break, really. But then, you can make that case for a lot of the other teams in the running for the top 4. I would agree with Doyle, though. I think the top 4, as it is now, will remain the top 4 by the end of the season. But then, just as Ian was speaking there, Chelsea's last 4, City away, then Arsenal and Leicester at home, and then Villa away. So, and even before that, all right, they've got Fulham at home, but they've got still got to go to West Ham. It's not a great run-in. And if you throw Champions League games into the mix, potentially more than 2 in Chelsea's case, because they have got their act together to a certain extent and made themselves hard to beat. So, again, they could give anyone a game, as they've shown in the Champions League so far. It's going to be really interesting. I think it's probably going to be a top 4 race that does go to the last couple of weeks of the season, just because even if Chelsea are in pole position, I think there's games there where they've got to get over the line in them, and they'll probably have to get points, and avoid defeat in those games. But yeah, absolutely. It's that whole thing of all season, pundits and ourselves have said Liverpool are a team that are capable of going on a run. And you still do believe that. I think the return of Fabinho and what it looks like he can do, not just in terms of allowing the team to have a settled pattern and rhythm and having people back in their right places, like Doyle said before, but also unlocking other players. I mean, Thiago, we might come on to him. I think he was much better in the Champions League than he was at Molineux, to put it mildly. But, I think he'll benefit from Thiago being there, from Fabinho being there. And in midfield as well, there's options now, isn't there? I mean, it was interesting last night that who came off the bench? It was Keita and Milner, wasn't it? And Jones towards the end was warming up and was possibly going to come on. But there's a lot of players there, if they all stay fit, who will be desperate for games and who will merit games and deserve games. So I think Liverpool, like we said, have got options, and have certainly got the potential now to go on a run. I think the thing that will define it will be Anfield form, and whether the teams who are coming to Anfield are a bit more adventurous, because, where they are at their stage of the season means that they have to pick up points, or, like I said earlier, that they're not that bothered. And, it's a bit of a beach game where, there's not that intensity in defence. They're not in the kind of most stringent and stubborn low block you've ever seen, or certainly that we've seen since December and January after that run of really tough games that Liverpool face. So I think absolutely they can do it. But having said all that, just because that they've got to rely on other teams and their form and lots of points to be dropped across the board, I think at this stage the Champions League is their best chance of finishing in the top four. Might change my mind on Friday when we see the draw and if it's Man City. but yeah, until then, that's what I'm going to say.
Well, the one midfielder he didn't mention then was Oxlade-Chamberlain, and he came on and he did pretty well actually. Klopp made a point, didn't he, saying he was a breath of fresh air when he came on. So, I mean, he was a little bit in and out. There was one poor pass he put to Trent out on the right, but he was full of a lot more energy than we've seen from him probably all season. So, whether he can play a part in the next few weeks, we don't know. I mean, I think me and Paul Gorst, we were both at the game, and we were talking when we were there about the midfield options that Liverpool have got, and suddenly you go, well, there was, what was it? Wijnaldum, Fabinho, and Thiago played. Milner and Oxlade-Chamberlain came on. Jones could have come on. Henderson is another one. Shaqiri's played there. So that's 8 players. And they always seem to play the 3 in midfield or variations on 2 or 3. So there are a lot of players there. And up front, Jota's now looks as though he's back and at his best. Firmino, he'll probably be back very, very soon, you'd like to think. So there are options elsewhere apart from the 2 centre-backs. So you're talking about injuries. It's like if one of those 2 gets injured in the next week, it's like that's it at the end. There's absolutely nothing down for Liverpool this season, I'm afraid.
Yeah, let's have the chat now about Ozan Kabak and Nat Phillips. I thought they both did everything that they needed to defensively. We know their limitations, as you said earlier, Doyle. They're maybe not the best at playing out and things like that, but you can only play what's in front of you. And I thought they both did really well. Was that the best game for you, Doyle, individually for those 2 centre-backs, but as a pairing as well that we've seen from them?
I think, to be honest with Nat Phillips, he hasn't done anything wrong since he's come in and played, has he? I can't remember him making he's been done for pace a few times, but, that's what happens with defenders. There are always going to be some players who are faster, but he managed to not get away with it, but the rest of the team covered for him, that's why it's a team. It's not an individual sport, it's a team game. So I don't think he's actually done anything wrong. In terms of his best performance, I think, West Ham at home, Sheffield United away, he was very good in both of those 2 games. So don't necessarily think it was his best. I think Kabak is probably his best, and that was after a bit of an uncertain start, shall we say. But he seemed to grow into it. I think you're possibly underselling him in terms of his ability to play the ball out from the back. I think Kabak's a bit better at that than Phillips. He went on one run, didn't he, where it was Bowley stopped it with his leg, and the referee gave a handball decision that kind of summed Craig Pawson up for the entire evening. He was pretty awful. He didn't even know when the game had ended. He had to have Mike Dean was on the side, like, "Go, come on, it's finished now." He's like waving at him, saying that's the end. I mean, to be fair, there was quite a lot of injury time, so I don't blame him too much for that one. But that was quite funny actually. But yeah, the centre backs, it helped, as I said before, with Trent playing so well. I don't necessarily agree with Sean on Andy Robertson. I thought he looked tired. Certainly the first half, he clearly doesn't like playing against Traore. Clearly doesn't like it. And at points in the second half, I mean, I think Traore was surrounded not just by Robertson, but I think Milner was on by that. But Milner and Fabinho were getting around him because they just thought, well, we just can't let him get past him. And he did still get to the byline a few times, like in the last minutes, as was said before. He managed to get past several players and get the crossing and overhit it. That's more down to Traore not being, that's why he's not managed to kick on this season with his end product, and possibly why Liverpool decided not to pursue any kind of deal for him last year and may not in the future now. But even though I still think there's probably a player in there. But going back to the defenders, Fabinho again. Fabinho is helping. He's helping Phillips and Kabak, and you kind of feel a little bit sorry for some of the other partnerships. The untried partnerships. You think of Reece Williams when he's played, where Fabinho wasn't there in defensive midfield. He was actually alongside him playing centre back, and that's tough. So they haven't had the same protection for much of the season, but now that they're getting it, they're getting the clean sheets and they're getting confidence, and they're gaining in confidence, and they're gaining in kind of the self-belief that they should be where they are, which is playing for Liverpool, playing at centre-back, playing in these big, they played in the Champions League game last week. I think Nat Phillips didn't. He said, I hope that's not going to be the pinnacle of my Liverpool career. And you kind of hope that it isn't. I mean, I still think further down the line, I think there's a certain sense of these two, whether they realise it or not, are probably playing for the possibility of being a fourth choice centre back for Liverpool next season, depending on what happens with the three who are injured at the moment. I mean, there's every chance that could be it, but certainly with Kabak, not only was he the youngest player on the pitch, Liverpool player on the pitch, which I think we overlook a little bit. He's also the least experienced in terms of minutes for Liverpool, so it's no surprise that certainly earlier on when he was playing, is that he's not quite up to it. I mean, compare him to Ben Davies, who's played many times in English football. He's got experience there, but he hasn't even kicked a ball for Liverpool yet. So we see from that it's not the easiest we've seen with players in the past, Andy Robertson, players like Fabinho himself. It takes time to get used to Klopp's methods, and I think Klopp said that, didn't he, last week about Kabak? So I wouldn't be too harsh on him, but I would be encouraged by the way that he played. Certainly in the second half, where Wolves started to put it into the mixer and decided to, we're going to see what Liverpool can do here, and the pair of them stood up to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, Ben Davies is obviously one that we've spoken about over the last few weeks. Wasn't in the squad at all.
Who?
Exactly. Who indeed? I've got a little bit of a theory that I want to run past you on Ben Davies, and you may well laugh me out of town on this one. I know I've been very positive about him in the past, but I wonder, is the fact that Klopp hasn't thrown him in at the deep end, is that actually a sign that he sees him as a long-term option? Is he maybe protecting him, working him in training rather than throwing him in now? As we've seen, with his comments from Robertson and Fabinho, is it actually the case that Jurgen Klopp is just trying to get him used to playing with his teammates and those sort of things away from the limelight, so that possibly next season he could be an option for Liverpool? Do you think that's viable, or am I just being massively optimistic there?
I mean, I don't think you're necessarily reaching. I mean, think back to Friday's press conference. Klopp spoke in a fair bit of detail, didn't he, about Davies and why it is just that sense of rhythm and familiarity is the main reason why we haven't seen much of him or anything of him so far. And he was kind of saying he will play when he's ready to play. He referenced, as you guys have, the fact that to be part of this Liverpool team, I think especially in midfield or defensive sense, there is so much to get used to. It's not necessarily a structure where you can just be thrown in. I mean, Virgil van Dijk maybe is one obvious exception to it in a defensive sense. But yeah, he literally said, I think Klopp said, Andy Robertson is the famous example or something along those lines. And okay, he's a fullback rather than a centre-back, but I think it applies. And, think back to January, and obviously we said it, fans said it, pundits said it, it wasn't ideal that these two fellas came in right at the end of the window. I think the more time they'd have had to bed in, the more kind of organised Liverpool have been about that, notwithstanding the whole Matip situation and how the picture did change, from kind of November onwards, even though I think after the Gomez injury, they should have been lining something up for January the 1st, but we've been over all that. But I think at that stage, you probably got to look at it and say, even though Kabak is younger, like Doyle said, I think we're really seeing a player who's still developing and is growing in confidence every game, especially with his partnership with Phillips. But whilst he's younger, he's played at a bit of a higher level, I'd say, than Davies. And there was that impression, and just the whole idea of, he's on loan now, but if he does come in the summer, it's a much, much bigger price tag than what Liverpool paid for Davies. I think he did almost come in with the air of being the senior man and perhaps the man who was a little bit more ready to be thrown into action straight away. And so it's proved, I think he's made mistakes in every game, almost, as much as Phillips has as well. But the partnership is developing into one that, with the tweaks Liverpool have made, is absolutely fine at the moment. I think, like Doyle said earlier, if there is another injury, then we really will see if Ben Davies is ready or how creative they can get with the limited options in the squad if midfielders have to come back into defence again. But yeah, I think that the partnership that's existing now with that slightly deeper line, with Fabinho back in place, with Liverpool being happy to give the other team more of the ball as well and kind of let Phillips and Kabak defend their area a little bit more than defending a bit higher up the pitch. I think that's been something we've seen over the last couple of games. We're looking at the possession stats. I think Liverpool were outpossessed, if you like, by Wolves last night. It was something like 47, 48% for Liverpool. I think against Leipzig, it was down to about 40. But it does then offer something different in a defensive and an attacking sense, doesn't it? It's a bit more clear what the lads at the back have to do. It's, the ball comes into the area, you head it away, you get it out in a kind of a little bit more of a basic sense, and to some degree, if the opposition are going to have a go, it helps the guys up front, doesn't it? We've seen two very slick kind of counter-attacking goals, really, haven't we, in the last couple of games that two of the best open play goals that Liverpool have scored for a while, if not all season. And I think the approach is part of that. But yeah, as for the Davies theory, we'll see. But more to the point, we've got a long read that Paul Gorst and Theo have done this, 2,000-word epic on Ben Davies, and we were going to save it until he played, but I don't know, might just have to publish it as soon as possible. So I'll wet the appetite
break for you. International break. That's where it's going.
It will get its chance.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing that I'd add to my theory as well is that obviously Kabak has come in because he's maybe the more experienced, has probably got the higher ceiling, but of course Liverpool do have to try him out with that decision to be made, the £18 million clause that they've got ahead of the summer. So certainly you've got to throw him in to see what he is all about. At the other end of the experience spectrum, though, Doyle, is Thiago Alcantara. We did mention him briefly earlier, just before we finish. I think we should probably have a little bit of a chat about him. It wasn't his best game. Is he almost trying too hard at the moment for Liverpool?
I think he's trying to tackle. I think he possibly needs to stop that. Well, actually, no. If you look at the game against Leipzig, he was very good. Kind of played to his strengths. He knows how to play in the Champions League, and that's something that a bit further down the line, I think when they start changing the team around, I think you'll see Thiago in all the Champions League games and possibly on the bench for some of the Premier League ones next month. He was off the pace through. He wasn't the only one. Let's be quite honest. As Sean said earlier on, the midfield with Wijnaldum may as well have. I know he did the good pass for Mane, but for the most part, he just wasn't really in it, was he? And that could come down to all the factors we've just spoken about, where Liverpool sat a bit deeper and just belted the ball anywhere. So, they weren't particularly too fussed in playing the ball through midfield half the time. That only kind of changed when Keita and then Oxlade-Chamberlain came on when the game had opened up, when they were winning. So, the way the game went favoured those two. But for Thiago, it was just tough going, wasn't it? He does tend to go to ground a little bit too easily. I know there was a tackle, I think it was Moutinho, where he actually won the ball but then caught him. So the referee played on. Then he fouled, I think it was Neves, where he should have possibly been booked, and then he did foul. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Bowley, I think, and then he did get booked. So, and then he was kind of like on edge. And I was surprised he came out for the second half, to be honest. And then when he got subbed, he seemed very surprised by that, didn't he? He just seems totally bewildered whenever he gets replaced. And it always seems to be when he's on the far end, so he never ever gets to come off. He's always like over there somewhere, and you just spot him walking around the pitch for about 5 minutes, just going, "Oh, I've been subbed again here. What's going on?" So no, he didn't have his best game. I wouldn't be massively concerned. In fact, I deliberately made a point of not writing a massive amount on him, because it's one game. He's just had a good game before that, and I think there were reasons for it that weren't all down to him. So no, I think it was just one of those days where certainly the start of the game, the pace was very, very fast. Didn't play into his hands. He never really got to grips with it after that. And once he got booked, he was treading on eggshells. Yeah,
there's a few moments in the game where he looked a little bit shocked. He seemed to be surprised that he'd picked up a yellow card. I'm not quite sure why that was. But,
well, the other one, he should have been booked for that.
He could have had at least 4 yellows in that game, I think. But fortunately, Craig Pawson didn't have the best of nights, as we mentioned before. But Sean, just in terms of Thiago, we mentioned before that there's lots of different midfield options for Liverpool. Is there a bit of pressure on him now for the rest of this season, given that Curtis Jones, when he's been in, has been really good. Naby Keita is fit for the time being and has looked good as well. Even Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain looked quite sharp last night.
I guess there is, but I think you're going to have, as we've already said, a run of 5 games in a short space of time after the international break. We hope as well that Liverpool will have more midweek games to come. If they get past whoever they get drawn in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. So I think rotation is going to be a certainty, because, like Doyle said before, they can't afford to lose virtually any game now. I don't think, if the ambitions domestically or in the European stage are wanting to be met. So with Thiago, I decided a few weeks ago really that I think it's just we've got to the point now where you can't really judge him on this season, because rarely at all has he ever been in a game where things around him or things personally for him are settled. I mean, I think that applies in several ways, really. Like in terms of game state, there's not many times where he's been able to just get his foot on the ball with Liverpool 1 or 2 goals in front and just pair and ping it around and, do what he was doing most weeks for Bayern Munich. And I'm not saying that means that he's a limited player and he's a luxury player and he only works as a part of the team when you're winning. But like, Liverpool make it hard for themselves in virtually every game this season. Even this week they've got 2 wins together, but in one of the games it took a bit of a while for the goals to come, and then in the other one it was only a 1-0. And as much as Fabinho clearly helped Thiago in the Champions League tie, how many times would he have played with him? It's still, you can probably count it on one hand, can't you? So there was certainly some, wasn't it, towards the start of the season, I should imagine. But yeah, he's got to get used to that as well. That's the thing. He's chopped and changed from being a 6 and being an 8 and being an 8 on each side. And virtually every week, there's different players behind him, alongside him, and indeed in front of him. Like Jota as well. Like they've been like 2 ships in the night a little bit this season, and getting used to his runs and where he'll be and how the team will just set up slightly differently if he's in the centre or if he's on one of the flanks. There's just so much going on, really. I mean, I think that the fouls, we're kind of in a position to laugh about it, but I said before, I just wish sometimes he just wouldn't throw his foot in. He just let a player go and let someone else deal with it, because especially early on, it always seems to be early on, doesn't it? As if a game does start in quite a frenetic manner, he does try and impose himself. And I think the way that Wolves started and the way the wing-backs kind of really pushed on, I think the wing-backs did get the better of Liverpool's full-backs quite early on, and Wolves' front 3 were pretty high and were pretty imposing, and they tried for a fast start and they were successful in that, apart from getting a goal. But yeah, it all added up to Thiago having a bit more ground to cover, being under a bit more pressure. And I just think even you're absolutely right. You could have made the case for him certainly getting booked earlier than he did, and maybe even getting 2 yellows with a ref who was feeling a bit harsh on the day. But then there was that incident where Mane was through, and I think the passage of play that led to that was a good Thiago ball and then a good Wijnaldum ball. So perhaps he could have got a little pre-assist, hockey assist, whatever you want to call it there. And
never call it a hockey assist. Never call it a hockey assist.
We'll scratch that for the record.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's on the ball virtually every time he's got it, and he's got a bit of time and he's got a bit of space. He looks like Thiago. But then when he's required to cover ground and fill in, and just you can see that he's still having to adapt to what it means to be part of a Jurgen Klopp midfield 3, which we've said it before. I think it's one of the hardest jobs in world football, really. It's 3 players. You've essentially got to do the job of 4, horizontally and vertically across the pitch, and it's not really what he's used to. And again, I don't think that he'd be ill suited to it. And I think in an ideal world, with a first choice Liverpool team who were operating and who were firing, games, virtually every game would have been so different, wouldn't it? And like, you'd have seen a different side of Thiago where he wasn't asked to do a lot of what he's had to do so far this season. So yeah, I've got every confidence next year it'll be a bit different for him. But I agree with what you said before. Not that he's under pressure, but it's not all on him from now until the end of the season. But certainly think of the Champions League, I'd love to see him kind of stepping up and having a few really big performances there.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly no long-term worries with him. I think pre-season could be a big thing for him to get used to playing with the proper players around him as well. Of course, no team selector or match predictions this week, but I did mention before we're going to predict something slightly different instead. I'm going to ask you to both predict what's going to happen for the rest of this season once the international break comes back. Liverpool with 9 league games to go, 5 points off the top 4. So 3 different things. Where will Liverpool finish? How far will they go in the Champions League? I know that's largely dependent on the draw on Friday. And finally, which player will be the most important for Liverpool between now and the end of this season? So, Doyle, if you want to go first on that one and give us your 3 different answers.
I either want them to finish 4th or 9th, basically. Right? So that's not what it's not what I want. It's what's going to happen. So I'm going to go with 5th, quarterfinals, and still Salah.
Those were my exact 3 answers, I think. Obviously, if Liverpool get Porto, my answer might change to the semi-finals. But I think apart from that, it might be a little bit of a stretch. Sean, what are you going to go for?
Oh, very, very tough. I think the player, I'll say Jota, just because he started his second mini spell almost as good as he started his initial introduction to life at Liverpool. So I think I'll get away with. I agree with what you're saying about Salah. He's been the standout man all season and has just continued to overperform and hasn't let anything worry him really, and has just stood up and been counted virtually every week. But I think Jota now allows for a bit more fluidity, a bit of rotation, and just a surprise package in terms of what to expect from Liverpool. And I think, like Doyle said earlier, he scored a few winners, he scored equalisers, he scored goals that put Liverpool ahead or seal victories. And if he does that 4 or 5 more times, which again, that might be quite a big ask, but that could be the difference between fourth and progression in the Champions League. So yeah, I'd say him. The more I look at Liverpool's fixtures and how I'd anticipate the teams will approach them, I think Liverpool have got a massive chance of progressing up the table. It's whether we still trust them to win home games and put that run together. I think, I'm going to say 5th. Champions League, I think if they avoid City or Chelsea, I think they'll go through to the semis. I'm going to say they'll get to the final. But wow. I just think they really, really need more than ever for this round now not to be one of the English teams and for it not to feel like 2 Premier League games. I think that would really hamper them. I think they lose to City. I think Chelsea would be very close. Probably be 2 tight games as we've seen in the past against Chelsea. If we get a nice, willing, expansive team who underestimate Liverpool, I think they'll go through, and then we'll see how far they go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see who Liverpool do get. 3 big games in the Premier League coming up as well, with Arsenal, Aston Villa and Leeds as well. Not an easy run of fixtures, but certainly something to look forward to after the international break. We'll, of course, have you covered across the Liverpool Echo and Blood Red too for the Champions League quarter-final draw on Friday. I think that one kicks off at 11 a.m. in the morning. For now, though, from myself, Matt Addison, from Ian Doyle, and from Sean Bradbury too. Until next time here on the Blood Red channel, thank you for joining us, and goodbye for now.